This is Gil Still, and this is my presentation for Module 12 over the case study narrative Black Lives Matter. Looking at Section 1, summarization of the case. So looking at who is involved first. So Ms. Simmons, an assistant superintendent that's in charge of curriculum at East City USD 101 Public Schools. There's local Black Lives Matter activist, East City High School, the local news outlets, the parents of USD 101 Public Schools, the superintendent, and high school principal. Still continuing with the summarization of the case. So what happened? Local Black Lives Matter activists organized a protest that was just a few blocks from the high school. The protest was scheduled between school's let-out time and when rush hour ends. This is where traffic became a little bit crazy and buses were trapped in the gridlock. The purpose of the protest was to raise awareness about racism and accountability based on police shootings of unarmed African American men. Parents were frustrated with the protesters and the city because they were allowed to protest near a busy intersection by the high school. Parents complained about the protest and actively put those complaints on social media. Miss Simmons visited the high school because some students were wearing All Lives Matter shirt and others were wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. She wanted to engage in conversation about the protest, but the superintendent and high school principal discouraged it. Later that afternoon, Miss Simmons thought about it and decided to ignore her colleagues' advice and wanted to look at developing a curriculum and guidelines for the student and teacher handbooks. Section 2, looking at legal or ethical issues. So looking at the legal side, paperwork for protest was completed, freedom of speech. Ethical, should Ms. Simmons engage students in a conversation about the protest and racism? Ms. Simmons goes against her colleagues' advice. Will the curriculum be approved? Will her guidelines be approved? Is a supportive and inclusive district culture being created? Is the well-being of each student being considered? Section 3, synthesize exactly what has happened. So parents were upset and tension was created due to local Black Lives Matter activists protesting a few blocks from the high school to raise awareness about racism, which encouraged Ms. Simmons to advocate for a supportive, inclusive district culture. Section 4, synthesizing the facts. So people involved: Ms. Simmons, the assistant superintendent, the superintendent and high school principal, upset parents and students of USD 101, Black Lives Matter activists, the local news outlets. Place that it occurred: East City USD 101 Public Schools, East City High School, and the busy intersection near the high school. Looking at the program, Black Lives Matter protest, informative curriculum, and then guidelines for the student-teacher handbooks. Section 5, so reviewing and prioritizing the information. So looking at the damage, so racism, conflict and divide of students wearing the two different types of shirts. Parents are complaining about the divisiveness of the situation. Ms. Simmons ignores her colleagues' advice. So questions that it makes you think about when you're reviewing and prioritizing information. How will the protest about racism impact the students? How do the parents feel about the protest? Will Ms. Simmons have support on the informative curriculum and the student and teacher handbook? Will Ms. Simmons have consequences for going against her colleagues' advice? But overall, how can we look at having a supportive, inclusive district culture be created? Section 6, the options and possible consequences. So if we have no action, more conflicts or divisiveness could occur. An inclusive district culture isn't occurring. And the second option, allowing Ms. Simmons to construct an informative curriculum as well as guidelines for the student teacher handbook. Possible consequences for going against the superintendent and high school principal. She's advocating for an equitable access to safe and nurturing schools and the resources as well. The well-being of each student is being looked at. Let's say there's collective efforts that are put together to come up with a solution to create an inclusive and supportive district culture. District resources and needs are being evaluated. There's a collective collaboration. It's not just coming from Ms. Simmons, from one person. It's allowing other stakeholders to be involved. There is a clear, informative curriculum and guidelines that are in place for student and teachers. Stakeholders could still be upset. Looking at section 7, so evaluating the options. So if we were to move forward with no decision, all stakeholders could still end up being upset. The equity, inclusiveness, and culturally responsiveness is not being truly looked at in the district. If we're allowing Ms. Simmons to move further with curriculum and guidelines, superintendent could be upset. Maybe there is possible no support. Ms. Simmons is advocating for safe and nurturing schools. Equity, inclusiveness, and culturally responsiveness is being considered in this scenario. Let's say we look at option 3, looking at the collective efforts. It's allowing for collective efficacy to occur and all stakeholders to be involved. We still may have some families and staff and students that may be against this, but overall, the equity, inclusiveness, and culturally responsiveness is being considered in this third scenario situation as well. So in thinking about the best option for section 8, I think the best option would be the collective efforts are put together to come up with a solution to create an inclusive and supportive district culture. So best reasons for it being the option, it's allowing all stakeholders to get together and have input, which helps build collective efficacy of the district. It gives the opportunity for Ms. Simmons to lead something that she's passionate about, so the multiplier effect. Informative curriculum is created. Guidelines for the student and teacher handbook is created. And the district overall is maintaining equity, inclusiveness, and being culturally responsive. So section 9, imagine implementation. So when thinking about this, first Ms. Simmons would get a group of stakeholders together that have a variety of opinions about racism and creating an equitable, inclusive, and culturally responsive school district. By doing this, this allows to hear input from everybody and everyone's thoughts and scenarios in their own lens on how they look at situations. Ms. Simmons and the committee would then review the current curriculum and guidelines of the student and teacher handbook that are in place. After that, next, they would be able to discuss adjustments that need made with the focus on culture responsive instructional practices among teachers and students. The updated suggestions would then be shared with an admin council and the Board of Education for approval. Lastly, solutions would be shared with all staff if approved by the board. Professional development would need to occur on the curriculum and guidelines so that all teachers know how to implement it to best impact their students. So looking at section 10, the correlation. So when thinking about all these PLOs and the CLOs, this course has really helped me learn a lot of different things and understanding on that my lens isn't the only lens that I should consider, and not even just the lens of everyone that's within the building. I need to think about families and everyone that's involved with our district and my school specifically right now, and in creating that equity, inclusiveness, and being culturally responsive. So throughout this presentation, I was looking and thinking about how do we advocate for this? How do we have make sure there's access to safe and nurturing schools? And then mainly thinking about the well-being of each student. No matter the scenario, no matter if it's just one student, we got to look at the overall picture to make sure they feel uncomfortable. But then also having these practices in place that we can support teachers best with all of these things. So reflection of this assignment and really this course overall. Throughout this case study, I've learned the importance of ensuring we are providing an equitable, inclusive, and culturally responsive environment. It is up to us as a district leader to be reflective upon our practices and seek input from various and all stakeholders. It also reminded me that we should provide professional development in areas of instructional materials, technologies, classrooms, for teachers, interventions, and adult relationships as all these things are necessary for the success and well-being of students. In addition, I also learned that even though something may be a hard topic, such as racism in this case study, as a district leader, that doesn't mean I should immediately shut down an employee for looking at solutions. Ms. Simmons was discouraged in this right away, instead of a conversation happening on what depth and what her perception was and maybe what possible solutions were. If Ms. Simmons would have been heard out, the superintendent may have understood that she was just trying to help with cultivating an inclusive and culturally responsive environment. So that's my reflection on this case study. Thank you.